That's too bad. These were the words my mother-in-law threw at me when I returned home from work. Who would ever imagine that when I tried to unlock the front door of my childhood home, I wouldn't be able to? Huh? It won't open. At first, I thought maybe I had the key facing the wrong way. I tried reinserting it, but still, no luck. Upon closer inspection of the keyhole, I realized the locks had been changed. I was dumbfounded, locked out of my own house. When I felt someone watching, I looked up to see my mother-in-law, smirking and saying, "Tough luck." That's when I lost it. My anger surged like an erupting volcano, threatening to overpower me. But I knew reacting impulsively wouldn't help. I took a deep breath to calm down. I won't let her get away with this. I glared at her as a form of resistance, silently fuming at her. My name is Linda, and I'm 40 years old. I'm a regular housewife, working a part-time cashier job at the local supermarket. My husband, James, is 35, 5 years my junior. We got married about 2 years ago after being introduced by a mutual friend, and we don't have kids yet. James often travels for work, sometimes being away for several months. While we're open to the idea of raising a child if it happens, we aren't actively seeking treatments or interventions to become pregnant. Then my mother passed away. I have faint memories of my father as he left when I was very young. My mother single-handedly raised me, so her loss felt like a gaping hole in my heart. Being an only child, I inherited our family home. James had no objections, so we started our new life there. But our blissful married life was disrupted when my mother-in-law found out. I never expected her to be so vindictive. It seemed our peaceful daily life was about to become a roller coaster. At one point, she expressed her desire to live with us. James naturally turned her down, but she was persistent. She reportedly called him dozens of times in a single day, trying to convince him. It was taking a toll on James. Over dinner, he'd say things like, "Again today?" with a strained smile. I felt guilty, thinking I was the cause of this added stress on him. But there was a reason James kept refusing her requests. The simple truth was that she and I didn't get along. Actually, when we went to introduce ourselves for marriage, my mother-in-law did something I didn't like. Back in my mid-20s, I had a health issue related to female reproductive health, and had to undergo surgery to remove one of my fallopian tubes. This happened before I met James, so I told him about it when we started dating. Still, what James told me then still resonates with me today. "I'm not with you just because I want kids. While I can still conceive, having only one fallopian tube means my chances are about half that of the average woman. Plus, being over 35, I felt the biological clock ticking." My mother-in-law hinted at wanting grandchildren right from the first time we met for introductions. I get it, being over 35, I know it might be better to have kids sooner rather than later. But James and I discussed it and decided that children are a blessing, and we'll let it happen naturally. She probably didn't like our decision. "You gotta act fast or you won't be able to conceive. Women have a time limit, you know," she'd say, always sticking her nose in. Without even asking us, she brought over a seasoned midwife she knew to give us a lecture on pregnancy and childbirth. She even once invited a woman who had a child at an older age to tell us how difficult it was after giving birth. In retrospect, I feel sorry for those people she dragged into it. But at the time, it was nothing but pressure to me, and it made me sick multiple times. High fevers, migraines, and recurring stomach aches. Seeing me suffer, James spoke to his mother and her nagging stopped, at least temporarily. By the way, James' father had passed away from cancer a few months before our marriage talks. So, she was probably reaching out too much to James and me to distract herself from her loneliness. Considering all this, James knew that living together would be super stressful for me. He consistently declined her offers to live with us. Yet, one day, she showed up at our place without any notice. When James asked how she knew our address, she confessed to having followed me from my workplace. Realizing she had been trailing me without my knowledge and now knew our address sent shivers down my spine. For once, James got really mad at her, but she acted as if nothing happened. And behind her was a fairly large suitcase, which gave me a bad feeling. So, I asked, "Mother-in-law, is that suitcase by any chance?" As expected, she said she had packed her stuff in it. I swallowed hard. Could it be that we're gonna start living together from this very moment? Given how proactive my mother-in-law has always been, an experience I've been subjected to more times than I'd care to remember, I couldn't help but get that feeling. I could tell by the increasingly stern look on James' face that he was thinking the same thing. But, paying no mind to our apprehension, my mother-in-law began rummaging through her suitcase and showed James some documents. The moment he saw them, the color drained from his face. "Mom! What do you mean you've terminated your apartment lease?" I was too shocked to say a word. Who would have guessed she'd give up her own apartment? Now, it seemed we had no choice but to let her stay. We exchanged worried glances. While we were drowning in despair, she calmly said, "If things go on like this, I'll end up homeless. With my husband gone and James being my only child, what'll I do if I'm left out in the cold?" Though she sneaked glances our way, it was clear she was doing this on purpose, knowing full well we had no option but to agree. I felt the spark of annoyance ignite. But I hid it, doing my best to respond with a smile. Sensing my resignation, James sighed but reluctantly led his mother into our home. We didn't want to cause a scene outside, not knowing what the neighbors might think. Being in a place much like Nebraska, community ties are strong, and using that to her advantage, she loudly lamented about becoming homeless. So, we had no choice but to let her in. James held his forehead, looked up to the sky, and apologized to me in a low voice. I told him, "No need to apologize," and glanced back at my mother-in-law. She barged into our home, looking around as if sizing up her new territory. Then, as if on cue, she swiped her finger over the shoe rack. Neither James nor I are neat freaks, we just clean over the weekend. Given that it's Friday night, we haven't cleaned the shoe rack yet, so her finger came away dusty. She shot me an accusing glare and berated me for not even being able to keep the house clean. If I had to say, her apartment had its own share of dust, and it wasn't particularly clean either. It was clear she just wanted to pick a fight, and my shoulders trembled in response. I wanted to retort right then and there, but I've always been the type to hold my tongue. Knowing that it'd be more trouble to upset her, I kept my cool and apologized to navigate the situation. But this was just the beginning of her nitpicking. Given the age of our house, it's only natural for it to have some quirks. But she complained about the hallway floor creaking and insisted we change our too hard sofa. After all, this is mine and James' living space. If she's forcing her way into our lives, she should adapt to us, right? But she didn't see it that way. Anytime James tried to reason with her, she'd deflect with some excuse. From demanding expensive tea to insisting that sweets should always be on hand, she's been unbearable since moving in. Just a few days with her had me feeling down in the dumps. Then, to make matters worse, a week after she moved in, James suddenly had to relocate for a little over a year for a client that only he could handle. He looked down, clearly feeling guilty. I tried to cheer him up, promising to hold down the fort while he's away, and saw him off with a smile. That's when my mother-in-law really showed her true colors. She never complained when James was around, but that night she criticized the meal I made. "I've thought this before, but your food is bland. Did you even use salt? And there aren't enough side dishes. This lacks in both nutrition and presentation." At first, she'd comment like that but still eat. As days went by, she escalated to dumping the meals I cooked right in front of me into the trash. I tried to adjust the taste to her liking, but she seemed bent on just tormenting me. In the end, I reverted to cooking the way I liked. Of course, she still complained. But if she's gonna throw it away anyway, I might as well cook it how I like it. My mother-in-law, angered by how I handled things, started gossiping with the neighbors when I wasn't around, spreading nasty rumors about me. Of course, everything she said was a bunch of lies. But, since the neighbors have known her since they were young, they just brushed off her stories and often consoled me when we met, saying must be tough, huh? That was the only silver lining. Those days went on and my spirit gradually wore down. I began mindlessly shuttling between work and home. A year passed since I started living with my mother-in-law. Lately, she started ignoring me. The atmosphere at home became so oppressive that I decided to work full-time, just to avoid seeing her as much as possible. Then, one day after work, as I tried to unlock the front door, the key wouldn't fit. Wait, why won't it open? I first thought I had it in the wrong way and tried again, but it still wouldn't work. On closer inspection, I realized the locks had been changed. I was shocked. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I'd be locked out of my own house. Suddenly, I felt someone watching. Glancing into the living room next to the entrance, there she was. My mother-in-law, with a sinister grin plastered on her face, looking right at me. "You're out of luck, aren't ya?" That was the last straw. I felt a volcanic eruption of anger surging from the depths of my heart, trying to take over. But I knew that acting impulsively wouldn't help, so I took a deep breath to calm myself down. I won't let her have her way. Fuming inside, I shot her a dirty look. She probably expected me to break down, beg, and make a scene. Not gonna happen. Quickly shifting gears, I turned on my heels. I headed to a nearby motel. After informing them I'd be staying for a few days, I decided to use this place as my base. I didn't have many personal belongings, and the essentials I'd need could be easily bought. With that, I decided I didn't need to return home anytime soon and ignored all the calls and messages from my mother-in-law. Soon enough, I got a call from my husband, James. I figured my mother-in-law probably spouted off some baseless rumors, so I thought I first had to clear up James' misunderstanding. However, it turned out that wasn't necessary. "I heard from Mom you ran off. She's the one causing trouble, right?" "I'm sorry, Linda. I wasn't around to help, and you've been through a lot. Can you tell me what happened while I was away?" "You're too kind. You probably kept quiet, not wanting to burden me." Relieved, I explained everything to him. I intended to keep it brief, but before I knew it, an hour had passed. James listened quietly, occasionally nodding. When I finished, he simply said, "I get it," and asked me to leave the rest to him. Within half an hour, my mother-in-law called. "You made James mad at me. You probably talked behind my back, huh? You're such a nasty piece of work." That really got to me. All the emotions I'd held back during our time living together came rushing back. I took a deep breath and let it all out, confronting her with every feeling I had inside. "I've only told the truth. Unlike you, I don't go around spreading lies to the neighbors or engage in sneaky, malicious behavior." At my words, my mother-in-law was taken aback and fell silent. It seemed I hit a nerve, and after that, she threw nonsensical and emotional words at me. However, I let them all go in one ear and out the other, thinking in my heart, "Just keep talking." A week passed in a flash. I returned home after a long absence. The locks had been changed, so I couldn't enter directly. Reluctantly, I rang the doorbell. Suddenly, the front door was flung open, and my mother-in-law, looking like she'd seen a ghost, appeared. Though I hadn't seen her for just a week, she looked like she had lost weight. With little inheritance left from my father-in-law, all she had was a meager amount of savings. Her appearance told the tale of how little she truly had. The moment our eyes met, she shouted, "Where have you been? I've been in such trouble because of you, you useless daughter-in-law." She seemed to have more to say, but stopped mid-sentence when she noticed my husband, James, standing behind me. "Huh? Why is James here? His work assignment isn't over yet, is it?" I didn't just decide to come home on a whim. My concerned husband took some days off and decided to come back. Seeing James' unexpected return, my mother-in-law looked visibly shaken. From her reaction, it was clear she had never shown this side of herself in front of James. James had some idea about what was going on from what I had told him. He was shocked to witness his mother's true nature firsthand. However, his shock quickly turned to anger, and he lashed out at her. "There's no way I can continue working under these circumstances. The most important person to me is Linda. I work for my life with Linda. And if Linda is in trouble, of course, I'm gonna come back. Especially if it's because of my own mother." My mother-in-law weakly denied it, but James cut her off, telling her not to make excuses. I jumped in after James. "I've kept a diary of everything you did to me." James had already read it, and the diary contained more horrendous acts by my mother-in-law than he had imagined. He was appalled. My mother-in-law looked away guiltily, muttering some excuse. Now was the time to speak my mind. I took a deep breath and told her. "This house is inherited by me. It's not a place where you can do as you please. I want to live here with my husband, but you don't belong here." "You didn't have to say it like that." She tried to protest, but I retorted. "Isn't it clear that being vague doesn't work with you? After all, you always speak your mind with me. It's only fair that I do the same." She was defeated and said nothing, shrinking back. "Well, it's about time we settle this." I took another deep breath and told her the truth. "We've already started the process to sell this house. James and I decided to sell it right away. We're going to pack our things and have some friends to move them to our new place, so you should start packing too." Upon saying that, my mother-in-law's eyes widened in shock. Actually, after being locked out of the house and confessing everything to my husband, I decided to take drastic measures and sell the house. My mother-in-law blamed me, asking why I went ahead with such a decision without consulting her. Why would I need her permission to sell the house? Since I inherited this house, even if he's my husband, he can't interfere. Inheritances are separate property, so even if we were to get divorced, it wouldn't be divided. It's something that's not included in the property division. To begin with, my mother-in-law has no right to say anything about this house. That's why I thought there was no need to consult her. I might have told her if we had a good relationship, but she forced us to live together and made life hard for me. Why should I be considerate to her? It's the house I live in with my husband, so I did check with him, and he backed me up saying I could do whatever I liked. That's when I went to a real estate agent with a certain flyer and asked if they could sell it. Apparently, the properties around here are popular lately, and even if they're small, many people want to buy them. The real estate agent I visited also had a flyer saying they'd buy used properties, and after checking if ours could be sold, they were keen to buy it right away. There seems to be a couple around here who want to open a cafe, and my house is just the right size, easily accessible, and has parking, which is a plus. Normally, I'd ignore such flyers or talk, but given the situation, I wasn't in a position to be picky. As soon as I met with the couple interested in buying, they said they'd pay a good price but wanted the house handed over within 2 or 3 weeks. I agreed immediately and told my husband about it. My husband found us a month-to-month apartment and said we could live there for a while. When we told my mother-in-law all of this, she was shocked, not expecting things to have progressed so far. Ignoring my mother-in-law, who had turned pale, we went inside the house and started packing. Being a minimalist and with a husband who often travels for work, we didn't have much to pack. In about 3 hours, all our belongings were packed in boxes and suitcases. Our friends helped us to handle the heavy furniture and appliances. Before we knew it, dusk was upon us. The western sky turned a deep red, accentuating the sorrow of my mother-in-law who stood there, lost in thought. Then, we hopped in our car and headed to our temporary apartment. That evening, as expected, the phone rang with a call from my mother-in-law. I answered while my husband, James, was in the shower. I had an inkling about what she'd say, but I listened to her anyway. She had always been quite assertive with me, but given her current situation, she probably didn't have the spirit to act that way. She pleaded in a soft voice, like the whine of a mosquito. "I apologize for everything I've done. It was all my fault. I never realized you, Linda, felt this way. I never intended. I'm sorry. Can we live together again?" Her voice, trying to be sweet, made me feel uneasy. Did she really think she could win me over with just those words? I'm not that simple. If it had been a matter of a day or two, maybe a simple apology would suffice. But after enduring a year of mistreatment from her, there was no way I could forgive her for trying to sweep everything under the rug with just a sorry. Thinking that an apology like that would suffice just shows how shallow your thinking is. I have no intention of forgiving you. Both James and I are thinking of cutting ties with you. The word cutting ties seemed to panic her even more. She rambled on, trying to appease me, but it was too late. After all her attempts to sabotage me, involving others with her lies, the audacity of expecting forgiveness was just too much. Suddenly, James, fresh out of the shower, heard her voice and yelled into the phone. She let out a small cry and hung up. We didn't hear from her after that. I blocked her number immediately, and James just sighed in disbelief. She was already in deep trouble, but little did she know what was awaiting her. Some time passed and the day to hand over the house approached. She seemed to be in a rush packing her stuff, but apparently, she hadn't finished. When she moved in, she only had 2 suitcases worth of belongings. But after James moved for his job, she'd made a ton of purchases online and at yard sales. Considering she was spending so much, she probably had nearly drained her savings or even her husband's inheritance. Yet, that spending had backfired. There was just too much stuff to pack. When James and I went to check on her, she yelled at us, her face red with anger. You two decided on this move. You have to take responsibility and find me a new place. But as I calmly revealed a shocking fact, her face changed from red to pale. Hey mother-in-law, did you really dip into our savings just because yours ran out and you used up your husband's inheritance? We had kept some cash aside for emergencies, and to think you actually stole it. And the neighbors mentioned seeing you with a young man. Family or not, there's a line between right and wrong. Recently, she's been completely ostracized from the neighborhood. Of course, the reason was because she spread ridiculous rumors about me. She was no longer welcome at the local gossip sessions, but ironically, those very sessions were buzzing with talk about her. Apparently, even in her 60s, people had seen her buying gifts like bags and jewelry for a young man and holding hands with him in public. Talk about karma. When James heard about this, he couldn't help but smirk at the thought of his own mother, over 60, gallivanting around with a young guy. My father-in-law has already passed away, so there's no one to blame, but it sure doesn't leave a good impression. Whether she felt ashamed or just helpless, I confronted her and firmly said, "Give back the money you took." She took a step back. She tried to make excuses about returning it later, but James suggested she should just withdraw it from an ATM now. She probably hadn't drained all her savings, and the cash we kept was just over $1,000, so she should have that much, right? Without a word of protest, she quietly withdrew the stolen money and handed it over. Then a couple, the buyers, showed up to finalize the transfer of the house. We had agreed that they would handle any items left in the house, so it wasn't a problem if she left a few things behind. They were actually pleased there were reusable items left, so we breathed a sigh of relief. Realizing she had no options left, she sank into despair unlike I'd ever seen before and shuffled away. Later on, I heard she was found living on the streets and was picked up by the police. From the beginning, she seemingly intended for James to come get her, refusing to look for a place on her own. But given all that had transpired, James, already having consulted with a real estate agent, bluntly told her about a cheap apartment she could live in. She silently agreed, drenched in sweat, without any argument. This budget apartment, where she had to share a bathroom, laundry, and other amenities, seemed like hell for her. Back when she lived with us, she was well-fed and healthy, but now she's become skeletal and pitiful to look at. She's barely making ends meet with a part-time job, but her habit of spending on young men hasn't changed, and she's in debt. The interest keeps piling up, and she's reportedly in total despair. As for us, we later bought a new house. Once the issue with James' mother was settled, he went back to his temporary work assignment, finished his tasks there, and then got promoted, meaning no more work-related moves. And, miraculously, I got pregnant in my 40s. I've heard it's not that uncommon these days to give birth in your 40s, which is a bit reassuring. I'm enjoying my ultrasound pictures and feeling the baby move, living each day to the fullest.